guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are starting back up on our Griffin. Last week we did the wings and the tail of the Griffin, and this week I'm going to show you guys how to do the sewing for the body along with making the paws and the paw pads. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start on the sewing of the body first, and then we'll move on to making the paw pads. Now, the actual pattern that I used to make the body was really large, and I figured it'd be a lot easier to show you how I drew out the pattern if I made it a lot smaller and broke it down to you like this. So basically, I started by drawing out the basic shape of the body, and then I broke it down into different spots where I want different colors to be. So you can see where I have them all labeled, and then the last thing I needed to do to make the inside parts of the legs was just kind of cut this part off and use this part for the legs. And then of course the belly pieces are going to be just simple strips of fabric. So I used the larger version of this to cut out all my fabric, and now we need to start sewing everything together. Now the very first thing we need to do is sew the whole side of the body piece together. So all the different color pieces that we have, we need to sew those together and make one solid side piece for the body. We need to do this for both sides. Now normally when I do my side pieces, they're one solid piece, but if you're going to break it up like I did in multiple different colors, you're going to have to sew it together. So again, if you're making something that's going to be one solid color, you don't need to do this. This is because I wanted to have different pieces of colors in different spots of the body. So we're going to sew all of these pieces together to make a left and a right body piece. And then once we have a left and a right body piece completely put together, we're going to start on the legs. So I'm going to take the inside parts of the legs and I'm going to lay them out onto the body piece, and we're going to sew down the front of everything. We're not going to sew down the back yet. We're going to leave that open so we can add the paw pads, and it just makes it a lot easier to put everything together. And then once we have all of the front of the legs sewn up, we need to start on the belly piece. Now the belly piece is really simple. It's basically just a long strip of fabric, and it's tapered at the very end where it's going to connect to the back legs. And just like the body piece, if you want, you can leave this just one solid color, but I wanted to have the very front of it to be white for the mane and then the back of it to be black for the belly. So I ended up making it out of two different colors of fabric, and then I just sewed them together. Now what we need to do is sew the belly piece to the two different sides of the body to connect everything together. And then once you have the belly piece in place, that's pretty much all the sewing for the body. We do need a strip of fabric to go down the very back of the Griffin, so it's basically the same thing as the belly piece, it's just a strip of fabric, but again I broke it into two different colors, and I just need to sew these two pieces together to make one strip going down the back. We're going to wait on sewing this to the body until we have everything ready and we're ready to put the Griffin together. So now that we have the sewing for the body all finished, we're going to move on to making the paws and the paw pads. Now the first thing that we need to do to make our Griffin's feet is we need to make the paw pads. So what I did was I took two pieces of paper because one wasn't large enough, I taped them together, and I made a basic stencil to follow while we're making the paw pads. So we're basically using this pattern right here as a guide to tell us where all the pads go on the foot. And it actually will work for both the front and back feet. All you have to do is take the thumb and the little thing at the wrist off of it and you have the back foot pads. Now the pads that we're going to use on the Griffin are going to be made out of resin, but before we can make them out of resin, we need to make an original clay piece, that way we can mold and cast our resin. So I'm going to use this pattern to help me shape out the paw pad pieces, and we're going to lay everything out. Now this is going to take quite a bit of clay, but it's not going to take as much clay as if we were going to make all four of the feet. So basically I'm going to start with the middle pad. I'm going to take some lumps of clay and I'm going to start blending them together into the shape of the paw pad. I'm going to use my stencil to help mark where everything is and to make sure that I have it shaped properly. So I'm just going to kind of lay it over the thing every now and again to make sure I've got the right shape. So I'm going to blend all of the clay together and make it one solid piece, and once I'm happy with the shape of this, I'm going to move on to making the toe pads. For the toe pads, I'm going to do basically the same thing, but they're a lot easier. I'm going to roll out some clay balls, and I'm going to press them where I want them and make sure they're the right shape. Again, I'm going to be using my stencil just to lay everything out. You don't really have to lay everything out like this. I'm just doing it because it's visually just a lot easier to understand how the foot goes together. And then once we have all of our pads shaped, we're going to work on adding some texture to them. And basically, I'm just taking a washcloth and I'm using the texture of the fabric and I'm pushing it into the clay just over and over again to create a nice rough texture. After that, we're going to put all of this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. We want to make sure it's nice and baked. Once all of our clay pads are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can start using them to make the molds so we can make the resin pads. Now one thing I'm going to do to make things a little bit easier, but you don't have to do this if you don't want to, is I'm going to glue all of my pads to a cardboard backing. That way everything stays in the correct position. So I'm just going to use that stencil again to mark where I want everything, and then I'm going to pull off the stencil once everything's glued into place. So what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to be taking some Play-Doh and I'm going to be using this to make the mold. Now you're welcome to make your mold out of something more permanent if you want to do this over and over again, but I don't think I'm going to be making something with this big of paw pads for quite a while, so I don't want to waste material on making a permanent mold. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to roll out some Play-Doh, make sure the surface is nice and smooth, and I'm going to push it onto the paw pad piece that we want to cast. So we're going to do this to all of the paw pad pieces, and then once we have everything set up for 1 foot, we're going to mix up some resin and fill the molds with it. Now because Play-Doh does dry out if you leave it out in the air, we do need to put everything in Tupperware or airtight containers while the resin is curing. So I'm going to make sure that everything is airtight, and we're going to leave these somewhere where they can cure overnight. Once it's the following day and all of our resin is nice and cured, we can peel off the Play-Doh and wash our pieces. Now I didn't have enough Play-Doh to do all of the feet at once, so I just casted 1 foot at a time. Okay, now that we have all the resin paw pads finished, we can move on to getting all the other pieces for the foot together. So right here is the pattern that I drew out to make the bottom of the foot. If you notice, I also have the paw pads traced on top because this part of the fabric, we're going to end up cutting that part out and having the paw pads sticking through. So I've got the main part of the foot right here, I've got all the toes, of course I've got the thumb, but if you're making the back legs, you're not going to be using that. So that's all the pattern pieces for the bottom of the foot. I'm going to be using a very short fur fabric for this, that way it's not very long and you can end up seeing the paw pads more. So I'm going to use this pattern to cut out the pieces for the bottom of the feet, and then I'm going to move on to showing you guys the tops of the feet. So I left this part really simple so it doesn't get super complicated, but these are basically going to be the tops of the feet. Think of this as the back of your palm, so the very top part of your hand. And then for the tops of the toes, it's really not a top of the toe, it's more of a side of the toe. So basically we're going to be having a left and a right for each toe. Now the 2 toes that are in the middle of the foot, these ones are a bit larger, so the pattern for this is going to be a bit larger, and then the outer toes are going to be a bit smaller. So basically I'm going to be taking 2 of these, a left and a right, and I'm going to sew down the very tops of them, leaving the back part open to connect to the back of the foot. Okay, so those are all the different fabric pieces that you're going to need to make the foot, so now let's start putting everything together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the paw pads to the bottom of the foot. Now one thing I did do to the paw pads was I glued them onto a little bit of a cardboard backing, so they had a bit of a lip. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting my E6000 glue all the way around the base of the paw pad, so just all the way around it, and then we're going to take the piece of fabric for that part of the paw pad and we're going to push it over, making sure that the paw pad is sticking out, and we're just going to make sure to tuck all of the fabric around the paw pad. So we're going to have to do this to all of the different pieces, and then we're going to have to leave everything to sit and dry for a few hours before we can start sewing with them. Okay, so here are all of the bottoms of our feet. They're all dried and we're ready to start on the sewing for them. So the first bit of sewing that we're going to be doing is we're going to work on the toes. So I'm going to take the tops of the toes that we connected together and we're going to add them to the bottom part of the toe. So to sew the toes, basically you're going to take one of the paw pad bottoms and you're going to take a top that we have already sewn together, and we're going to sew that around the toe pad. After you sew around the pad, you're going to flip this right side out, and then you're going to do this to the rest of the toes. Okay, so all of our toes are sewn, and now we need to add them to the bottom of the foot. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sewing the base of the bottom of the toe to the base of the bottom of the foot. So we're going to connect it all together. The way we basically have it laid out, we're just going to sew them together. After you have the toes sewn onto the bottom of the foot, now we need to add the top of the foot to the piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top of the foot and we're going to be sewing this part to the tops of all of the toes. And then once we get this sewn onto the toes, we're going to continue going all the way down the foot. Once you have everything sewn into place, you can stuff all the toes and the rest of the foot. And then the last little bit that we need to do to our feet is we need to go over all of the toes a little bit and just shorten all the fur. So I'm going to take my hair trimmer and I'm just going to go over everything and straighten everything up and make it look a little less shaggy. And then once I'm done shaving everything, we're pretty much done with the feet and the body. Okay guys, and that's how I did the sewing for the body of the Griffin, along with making all the paw pads. I just realized how creepy this looks in the viewfinder of the camera that I have little paws severed behind me. Anyways, next week we are going to be working on making the face of the Griffin and putting everything together and finishing it up. So keep an eye out for that video. It's going to be on Friday, and we're also going to have a video Thursday. I just have no idea what it is yet. Anyways guys, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, leave me a like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!